I suppose in this relationship that there will be some things which are easily unwound, and others probably on the hedging side, which have a longer duration. In our setup, we can actually unwind and terminate the partnership within 2 weeks. And it should be able to, one would expect to be able to negotiate in one's legal agreements. And that, of course, is another fundamental, the agreements that you have, because you're talking about investment management, you're talking about advisory management, and you're talking about custodian services. So sometimes it's better to have these separately so that you can look at each legal agreement in place, although of course a good legal agreement means that you don't need to refer to it. The thing that we did insist on is that if we wish to, and if things weren't going out as we wish, that we could get out of the partnership easily and quickly. And to say, we've actually managed to limit that to 2 weeks, which I think is pretty quick for anyone to move.
The ability to unwind the relationship, I think, is fundamental. Now, naturally, there are differences determined by things like the liquidity of particular investments, who has the final ownership of the assets. But I think if your fiduciary relationship is a one-way relationship, I don't think that's very attractive for anyone, and it doesn't lead to effective accountability and so forth. So having the ability to unwind, I think, is relatively short notice. I think is standard industry practice. So.
How about this issue, which was highlighted by KPMG in their report at the end of last year about how you benchmark?
Well, I think the difficulty is
they raised concerns about it. That it was something difficult to do.
The difficulty is in terms of the broad spectrum, even within a single fiduciary manager, in terms of the range of delegation, the range of investment objectives that different pension schemes have. So just saying for a single client that, given the different constraints that have been put on them by the trustees, just how much value has been added is quite difficult. Having more qualitative measures of value added may be a way of assessing it. For example, key performance indicators allow you to assess how the trustees feel, and then you have how they feel the relationship is going. In terms of benchmarking the different styles of investment across fiduciary managers, well, I think there may be an argument there for having what you might call a standard proxy pension scheme that all fiduciary managers can sort of pretend to invest in as part of the benchmarking process. But I think we're a long way from doing that is yet. I think the ability for to empower the trustees and is the true measure of fiduciary management. Sometimes that's more easily measurable in terms of additional dollars or pounds made than in other cases, but just because the measurement problem is difficult doesn't mean we should be saying that fiduciary management is an unmeasurable quantity.
Thank you.
I think in terms of measuring managers, I think trustees shouldn't get too hung up about what other fiduciary managers are doing. They should be looking at, is your fiduciary manager, after all costs, helping you move down this journey plan towards your long-term goals of de-risking, getting to your funding level from where it is to where you want it to be over that time. The fact that somebody else might have done a better or worse job for you, I think, is beside the point. I think you've bought into this arrangement which is going to help you get there, and I think that's the measure of success after fees. In terms of if you're going into this and you want, how do we know if you're any good at what you say you're going to do? Some sort of model fund might be the way it's going to go. I don't know. There's a problem out there that's looking for a solution to help those who are thinking about this have some way of assessing whether the words that potential candidates offer can be proven to have some substance and things like that. So I think that's a job of work that needs to be done, and I don't know where it's going to end up and when, but I do think trustees should not get too hung up about what everybody else is doing. Are we achieving our goals? Are we moving down the route towards full funding over a time period that suits us, suits our sponsor, suits our covenant? If we are, well, let's just be happy that we're making progress in the right direction.
Sure. What about the issue of unwinding relationships?
It's interesting. You're right that yes, it's almost like a prenuptial. You should know the terms on which you're going to extricate yourself. But I wonder if it's as easy as might be inferred by some of these comments. Actually, the liquidity point, especially if you're buying into some pooled funds that the fiduciary manager runs themselves, they might or might not allow you to retain those for a period of time. So I think there are potential issues. I don't think it's really been tested in the UK yet. I suspect there have been a few mandates in Holland that have moved, and I don't know the background to any of that. But I suspect it's still quite rare for people to sack their fiduciary manager, and whether they choose another fiduciary manager or go back to the traditional approach, I think that's also an interesting angle. What will happen? And maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, when the cycle has been round, we might see more of these mandates retested in the market. And then that's an interesting challenge for providers who are going to want to try and pick up existing fiduciary mandates with another provider, and the whole story around how they seamlessly transition you from fiduciary manager A to fiduciary manager B. I think that's yet to happen.
Well, on the question of unwinding the relationship, I think it can be set up in a very simplistic way where it's very easy to do. And actually, the way we've structured it, effectively the trustees could ask us to back away, and we could do that tomorrow, and the assets would then go with the trustees. I think it comes down to the way in which the implementation framework is set up, where the custodian process is set up, and the details of the agreement. On the point of, if you like, putting together a league table of performance, well, I think we're never going to do that because of the nature of the beast and the way in which it works. The difficulty is very much around, I think, the strategic side, not the manager selection side. It's very easy to look at the managers you've selected and say, have these managers performed well? But in terms of the strategy side, have we de-risked at the right time? Have we had the right asset allocation? Well, that's very difficult. And just to give an example, you can have a situation as a fiduciary provider where the funding level is worse than actually when you started. But it could have been a damn sight worse, and if you'd not been involved in the process. So how do you actually benchmark in that situation? Because you've done a good job, even though things have got worse. And that makes it difficult. What we have done in some instances is done the what-if scenario, where we say, okay, if you hadn't appointed us, how would things have panned out, and how did they pan out if you did appoint us? And yes, we get a better result at the end, but take your point from earlier, you don't ever truly know what you might have done if you hadn't appointed us. So it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, on the point of performance measurement, I think this relates to, is this a solution or is it a product? If it's a product, you can just show performance figures and compare between various managers, just like you take UK equity managers and compare how they've done against the FTSE All-Share. Because it's a product. It's a standardized mandate and it's like-for-like comparison. But if fiduciary management is not full delegation, if it is a customized, bespoke governance solution that allows where the fiduciary manager makes certain decisions and executes all decisions, and where the trustees retain some other decisions, or the trustees, and let's not forget the sponsor, especially about de-risking decisions, where they're often very closely involved. A performance track record, the evolution of a funding ratio becomes a story. It's no longer something that you can compare between any two clients. It also depends on what time you started. Clearly, a pension fund that started on the fiduciary management approach in 2007 and thought, let's de-risk here and diversify, they would today be in a completely different situation than the pension fund that started in 2009 or 2010. So that kind of comparison, I don't think fits with a solution, and it's very, very hard to compare. What we have done, and Gwion alluded to that, is we do like having a clear definition of what success means to our clients. And clearly that includes how the funding level is evolving over time. Even if we as a fiduciary manager don't have full control over that either, it's ultimately driven by what markets are doing. Yeah? And then secondly, by some of the strategic decisions that the trustees are making, and then only thirdly by us. But we think it provides a good alignment of interest. Yeah, that if the trustees are suffering, we are sharing in that pain, even though we don't have full control over that pain. But in addition to that, to also have the trustees scores on timeliness of the reporting, quality of the reporting, transparency. Are we proactive in bringing new ideas to them? Are we sensitive to their requirements? And we allow them to score. We have some clients who scores on a balanced scorecard essentially annually, and that determines a part of our fee. The only thing we require is when we get a fail on a certain area, that the trustee gives us time to actually explain to us why we failed in their view and what we need to do to get better.
One thing I would just say, if I can quickly, in terms of fees, because I think it's a very good point, is on performance-related fees. And I think when putting together the contract and thinking about the fee structure, it's an very important point to consider, because we have seen some providers in the recent past where they've done incredibly well in terms of performance fees, not because of any decisions they've taken, but simply because it's been very easy to outperform LIBOR given where markets are heading. So, and they've earned lots and lots of money out of just effectively doing nothing but having a very favourable performance fee clause in their contract.
Strongly agree with that. I question how would the performance fee alter the behaviour of your fiduciary manager, and do you really want a fiduciary manager who's altering the behaviour because of the performance fee? So it very much it's what people expect as being the source of the alignment of interest, but in fact I think it probably does quite the opposite.
Sure. Yeah. Just a final question about unwinding relationships. Yeah. Any observations from the Netherlands about how that's
there have been mandates that have moved around. We, for example, one of our clients went for a reinsurance, a buyout essentially, and so we had to transition the assets out. This is really the moment where the alignment of interest shows, right? A purely commercial provider who gets the note saying, we hereby cancel your appointment, might have one approach. If you're truly aligned with the pension fund, it's also in that period of unwinding the relationship that you improve your value added in doing what is best for your client, even though you've been the appointment has been terminated. We have not encountered any issues there. In fact, in this one particular case, we received lots of compliments from the client in moving the assets quickly and as cheap. It's in some ways it's not an issue apart from illiquid assets, which sometimes do pose an issue, and that's making sure up front before you invest that you're willing to live with the consequences. 2 weeks notice period, it's easy to meet that because you could just sell all the assets. But then it becomes a cost issue, and is that really in the interest of the pension scheme? So when most of us will be working with pooled funds, how willing and able are you to provide in-kind transfers, in-specie transfers of assets? How quickly can you do that? How professionally do you do that? How do you make sure that continuous exposure is maintained without incurring all kinds of costs? I think it is a really important area to consider. And the easy answers are sometimes, like everything in life, are often too easy.